further and we say that, well, we agree to goals, let's agree to the tests or the metrics we're going to use to prove those goals. So we actually nail down what the test is that we're going to use, for example, again, a sitemap, before we ever look at it. And I'll actually show you the example here. So we have this simple sitemap test. The first thing a sitemap needs to be able to do is sitemap meaning just primary navigation on your site. Given any piece of content in the entire website, would a user know which top-level navigation element to click to find that content? Make sense? Mm-hmm. Second part of this test is for each top-level navigation option, if the user's asked, what would you expect to find when you click on this? Will she respond with an answer that is 90% accurate? And we require that these two tests match positive before we can say, yeah, we're done with this piece. We're working with a prominent political magazine and doing a redesign, redevelopment process, and we're going through the information architecture process. And we made a recommendation with regard to the sitemap, and they weren't happy with one of the navigation labels we suggested, and they wanted to change that with the term voices. And we had this problem of what is voices? Is voices, Drupal author pages with a list of all the user's content? Is it politically charged interviews with everyday Americans? Or is it audio interviews with political thought leaders? Or any number of other things? And obviously, it just doesn't work. And the great thing is, when you decide on the test first, it's not an argument. It's not their opinion versus our opinion. It clearly doesn't work. We talked about other options. We went with something else that they suggested. We actually simplified it, and I think they went with writers. And writers is, of course, the first one. It's a list of writers with all the content that writers produce. But understanding, this point is so important, I think, to getting away from some of the grief and some of these conversations around, I think it should be this way, and no, I think it should be that way, is agreeing to the tests, agreeing to the criteria before you ever see a deliverable. There's another problem with not keeping focus on goals, and that's being distracted by details that don't matter. Squirrels. A classic example of this is looking at wireframes. It's too gray and the fonts are boring. Has anyone had this feedback? Okay. I'm always surprised. It seems like one of those examples that isn't real, but it's one of those examples that's an example because it absolutely is real. In this case, it actually did. With this project, this is from an actual project, and we talked a lot about it, and it wasn't an issue. But it's surprising how often that comes up. And again, I think it takes ahead of time talking about what the purpose of this is, keeping focus on goals. And then when you get that feedback, going back to what the goals are, because that happens. Something we try to do that lines up with this whole issue of keeping people focused on goals as well is keeping deliverables really simple. And I'll actually talk about wireframes again in a second, but first sitemaps. So we used to do sitemaps something like this. Illustrated and a lot of attention to detail, and we use icons for all the different sections, and it looks really cool. It's a little bit harder to give feedback to. You end up a little bit, I feel like there's some distraction with people paying more attention to the design of this than they are to the content of this. Anymore, we literally use Google Docs and just do an outline. And I felt a little weird about this at first. It just seems like such a simple thing, and it's something that, it goes into deliverables. It's something that they're paying for, and I think, again, simple is better. Another example of that actually is wireframes. We used to do wireframes. Does anyone do wireframes that look anything like this? Mm-hmm. These are kind of gray box style wireframes. Wireframes are kind of different for different companies. We used to do wireframes like this to just establish weight for content on pages, and also catalog all of the different interface elements and content that would go on a page. We got kind of tired of the fonts are boring, gray, feedback, and beyond. It's not a matter really of getting tired of it. It just was too distracting, and so now we do something called content maps, which again are just a numbered list in a Google Doc, and the content map shows exactly what elements are going to exist on the page, and by nature of where they are in the list, how important they are, how prominent they should be in the design process. And this is the last thing a client will see before they see a polished comp. So we go right from here into creating a polished comp, and the next, or a polished design concept. And the other thing I love about that is it doesn't limit the designer. And it actually, if we do this right, it actually provides more detail than those wireframes do. So the designer knows exactly what needs to happen.
So is this weighted, like in the list, like the more important things?
Exactly. That's exactly right.